Welcome to the WalterFootball.com podcast. This is episode 193. It's our NFL mock draft extravaganza. Joined, as always, by Kenny Ortiz from FantasyJabber.com. How's it going, Kenny?
Well, this is take two. We attempted one. We had some tech issues, but hopefully we got it corrected. But I'm feeling great. For those of the regular listeners of the podcast know, I sounded like a dying horse a week ago. Hopefully I'm sounding about, or as Walt said, as a man who smoked for 80 years.
Yeah, so I said 50 years, but 80 might be more accurate. And our special guest is Charlie Campbell, our senior NFL draft analyst. How's it going, Charlie?
I'm doing great. Hopefully our connection issues are better now, and Google has got their act together.
Yeah, you definitely sound better, Charlie. So the question I asked you to start our first take was, so you're back in Tampa. How's it feel to be back in Tampa? And what are some of the big takeaways you had from the combine, because you were in Indianapolis?
Yeah, definitely. It's great to be back in Tampa. Nice warm weather out of the cold of Indianapolis. And the combine this year was excellent. Was really very fruitful in terms of talking to our team sources, getting an idea as to who are the players that they like, who's interviewing well, how they're kind of planning to attack the draft in the off season, and where they stand with some of their own current veterans. So it was really excellent. We had a lot of great stuff up on the site. So if people are curious, they can go back and see. And it's still fresh information. Free agency really hasn't put a dent in it. So plenty there to get refreshed on as we get really into the nuts and bolts of draft season.
Yeah, Charlie, you had some great reports during the combine. They're great. And like you said, you can still go to the website and still read them. You have some breaking news about the 49ers that you're going to share with the number 2 pick, and also some news on the Raiders. So let's get to our mock draft. So I'm going to go first. I made a joke about not being being selfish and having the number 1 pick, but it's more so because Charlie has some interesting information about the 49ers and Raiders, who are drafting 2nd and 4th. So it makes sense for him to go even again. I'll go odd. The number 1 pick, the Arizona Cardinals will select Kyler Murray, quarterback from Oklahoma. Murray measured in, it's 5'10" and 1/8 at the combine. There's some talk that his height might have been enhanced. And I heard from someone who said that Baker Mayfield's height might have been enhanced last year. That didn't stop him from going number 1. So I don't think it'll stop Kyler Murray from going number 1. It sounds like Arizona loves him, so I think he's the pick. So Charlie, who do you have going to the 49ers at number 2? And what's the news you have about the 49ers?
Yeah, definitely. And just to piggyback on your height comment about Murray, I remember speaking with area scouts who were through Oklahoma in the fall. They thought he was 5'9", and they have similar height to them personally. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little generosity in that measurement. That's happened before, probably more than we all realize. But on to the 49ers here. So I spoke with a few team sources there, 2 independently, and they both kind of echoed the same things, people high up in the organization. And that was, if they stick at 2, the 2 players that it really sounds like it's coming down to are Quinnen Williams, the defensive tackle from Alabama, Nick Bosa, the defensive end from Ohio State, the 2 best players in the draft. And really, it sounded like their heart was with Quinnen Williams. The brain may have been with Nick Bosa. For Bosa, plays a position of need, more so than defensive tackle. They've really needed edge rush help, and he would bring that to them. They also feel he's a bit of a safer pick, especially when you consider he had 2 full seasons at Ohio State, whereas Quinnen Williams was really just a one-year wonder at Alabama, not through any fault of his own, but just because they had Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne and Raekwon Davis and all these other first-round picks who are older than him and more experienced. So at any rate, it sounded like their heart was kind of with Quinnen Williams. That was he was the one that they felt was really special, had a ton of upside. And another thing to consider here is their new defensive line coach has said, John Lynch said, it's changed the way they're evaluating edge rushers and defensive ends. And you look at Nick Bosa's measurements, not all that different from Solomon Thomas, who's been a disappointment as a pass rusher. Obviously, I think Nick Bosa's way better, but in terms of what John Lynch said there, and their new defensive line coach, I'm having a brain lapse and forgetting the name, but he's been with Detroit. Ziggy Ansah was one of his guys there. He's gone for the longer framed defensive end. So with all that being the case, and just kind of hearing the emotion in the voice, that's tough to translate. I'm going to have them take Quinnen Williams and try and form that dynamic inside duo, kind of like the Rams did last year with Donald and Sue, except 49ers, it'll be Williams and Buckner.
Okay, that's Arizona taking Kyler Murray, the 49ers taking Quinnen Williams. Kenny, I'm interested in hearing your opinion on these picks, even though I heard it 20 minutes ago.
Great. Hey, by the way, the connection's way better. Charlie, your voice is sounding great. I'm sure the listeners love it. I think Kyler Murray should not be the first pick overall, but we've seen this over and over again, right? Year after year, quarterbacks, they always get over elevated. That's the nature of the position. You know, one of, if not the most important position in all of sports, some would say. And we saw it a couple years ago with Carson Wentz, who was really looked at as a guy who'd be drafted in the latter half of the first round. And then he became a top 15 pick and then top 10. And by the time the draft rolled around, the Eagles were needing to go up to number 2 to get him. So that's the nature of it. Kyler Murray probably should not be the number 1 pick of the draft, but I think at this point, I'd be shocked if he's not. The second pick of the draft, Williams, plays at Alabama. Again, I don't watch nearly as much college football, nearly as much as you guys do, but we watch Alabama play, obviously. And he's a great player, but as you mentioned, Charlie, he's a one-hit wonder sort of guy. I think the best player in this draft might be Nick Bosa. I'm biased toward the Big Ten because it's the only conference that I actually still watch much throughout the year. But I think he's the best player in this draft, and I think he should be the number 1 pick of the draft. So the fact that he's not in the top 2, I think, is a mistake.
Okay, so the number 3 pick belongs to the Jets, and we're not projecting trades in this mock draft. I think Charlie and I in the future will do some quick mock drafts, maybe like 15 to 20 minutes, where we'll discuss like beforehand that we're going to project trades, but not here. And I think the Jets do want to trade down because they don't have a second round pick. But if they stay put and Nick Bosa is on the board, I think it's a no-brainer for them. They need an edge rusher. They try to sign Anthony Barr to be an edge rusher for them, and Barr signed with them, quote unquote, signed with them on Monday, and then he changed his mind the following night, and now he's going back to Minnesota. So the Jets have a huge hole at edge rushers. So Nick Bosa would fill that very easily. So Charlie, you're at number 4 with the Raiders. So who do you have them taking, and what news do you have about this pick?
Yeah, in our combine reports, we had it there that the Raiders really liked Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins, that they were both in play for them at 4. The thinking was they might take one of them and then trade Derek Carr. That would also help them to get in a better financial and salary cap situation by dealing Carr's contract and having the luxury of a franchise quarterback on a rookie deal. So with that being the case, I'm having them take Dwayne Haskins, but we'll be following up with the Raiders sources. I actually have been in touch with them. They're really excited about Antonio Brown. So we'll have more on this in the weeks to come. And maybe once they get into the draft meetings, John Gruden's always been inclined to veterans, whether it was with the Bucs or with his first go around with the Raiders. Never drafted a quarterback in the first round and made him that franchise quarterback. So we'll see when push comes to shove whether they stick with this. But at the combine, it really sounded like Haskins and Murray were the kind of favorites at number 4.
So that's the Jets taking Nick Bosa at 3, Dwayne Haskins going to the Raiders at 4. What do you think, Kenny?
Nick Bosa at 3. I mean, potentially getting the best player in the draft. I think that's a great pick for the Jets. Position of need. Hard to say much more than that. The quarterback going number 4, the Raiders, is a little surprising to me. If they do it thinking they're going to be able to trade Derek Carr seems a little difficult because with that contract, and there's not a whole lot of spots. The Eagles had trouble trading Nick Foles because there weren't many spots for teams looking for a veteran quarterback. The Dolphins are really the only team I think potentially, but they look like they're in Sam Hinkie tank mode at this point. So I don't know that they're going to go after a quarterback. So I would imagine if they draft a quarterback at 4, it's because they're thinking the rookie's going to sit for a year or two. And that I guess that would be surprising to me if the Raiders did that. And I don't know that that's a wise thing for them to do with the amount of money they have invested at Derek Carr at this point. But I don't know. Crazier things have happened, I guess, in the NFL.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. And in our first recording, we talked about potential destinations for Derek Carr. Charlie mentioned the Giants and the Redskins, and I added the Patriots to that because Tom Brady turns 42 in August, and they need a successor. So, number 5, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think Josh Allen is the easy pick here. He's the best player available. He fills a huge need. They need an edge rusher, and they're transitioning to a hybrid defense. So he would make sense there schematically. I just think this is an easy pick. So, Charlie, number 6, the New York Giants. Who do you have them taking?
Yeah, the Giants, I have taking Daniel Jones in this mock. I think obviously they're desperate for a franchise quarterback, a young one to succeed Eli Manning. Jones has that same David Cutcliffe pedigree as the Manning boys, and they know him well already. So I think in terms of having a young guy to be there behind Eli, that's almost an ideal candidate to avoid any kind of locker room issues. So in this, the way the Giants have, I think, made some mistakes, but if Jones pans out, it could all smell like roses a few years from now. So I'm having him take Daniel Jones.
So that's Josh Allen, 5 to the Buccaneers, Daniel Jones, 6 to the Giants. Kenny, I know you're a Kentucky and Duke football enthusiast, so what do you think about these picks?
Earlier we were discussing this. Yeah, I watch a lot of Duke, Kentucky, but it's not usually college football. College basketball, one of my few guilty pleasures that I still keep in my life. And yeah, I love watching those schools. And no, on a serious note, I mean, yeah, I don't watch a lot of Kentucky football. So I'm not going to tell you that I've seen Josh Allen, but everything you read about him is this guy is, just like a great athlete, edge rusher, definitely makes sense. If he can meet that need for them. As far as the Giants taking a quarterback there, Dan Jones, I mean, I've seen him. I've seen some people say that he's not even in the top 4 quarterbacks in this draft. I've seen Drew Lock rated ahead of him by some scouts. I've seen Ryan Finley even rated ahead of him, the quarterback from North Carolina State, rated ahead of him by some people on the web. There are several people that think he's not really a first-round talent. I don't know what you guys think of him. But if the Giants take him at 6, that seemingly is a disaster. I think their better bet is to try to move up to try to get Murray or Haskins, to try to get into the top 4 to get Haskins in particular. Again, maybe my Big Ten bias is showing there. But I think the Giants have completely mishandled many things, including keeping Eli Manning. And of course, as an Eagles fan, that makes my heart feel very happy.
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about the Giants. Them keeping Eli Manning prevented them from re-signing Landon Collins. So it just goes to show how bad of a decision that's been. So anyway, let's moving on. The Jaguars at number 7. So they signed Nick Foles. They need a receiver. They need offensive linemen, but the Jaguars' MO has been to draft the best player available. And I think in this area, it's Rashawn Gary, the defensive lineman from Michigan. Gary has so much potential. He hasn't really lived up to it at Michigan, but his upside is definitely a perennial all pro player. And the Jaguars might think that they might be able to develop him into a stud. And they need defensive linemen for the future. They lost Malik Jackson. Calais Campbell's not going to be there for that much longer. So Gary, I think, makes sense. He doesn't fill the biggest need, but he does fill a need, and he's arguably the best player available. So at number 8, Charlie, who do you have the Lions taking?
Well, at 8 here, I have them continuing the edge rush run here and going with Montez Sweat from Mississippi State. They signed Trey Flowers. Now they get an end to go across from him. And I think Sweat, with his versatility, where he could be a 3-4 outside linebacker or a 4-3 end, will really appeal to Matt Patricia. And they have the big boys on the inside and Snacks Harrison and Ashawn Robinson to eat up blocks. So I think Sweat could finish off that 4-man defensive line, and Deshaun Hand coming in to also be that sub-package interior rusher. So I think that would really make the Lions' defensive line so much better from what it was last year. So I'm going to have them take Montez Sweat.
So it's 2 defensive linemen, 7. The Jaguars taking Rashawn Gary, 8. The Lions picking Montez Sweat. What do you think, Kenny?
But I mean, Gary at 7, I think makes sense. As you said, he's one of those guys that people talk about being the best overall athletes, one of the best players. And having watched him a little bit at Michigan, the reality is it just seems like there's plays where he just goes away. There's some inconsistency there. And he's one of those guys. I've seen him mocked as low as like 25 to the Eagles, and I've seen him mocked in the top 10 at a couple different spots. He's a type of guy that he could be a great player or could be a bust, so they makes you a little nervous. Sweat, I'm not going to lie and say I've watched a lot of Mississippi State football. I haven't, but he seems to be the kind of guy who stands out when you watch him play. He stands off the screen as a great playmaker, and so. As Charlie mentioned, they add Trey Flowers, and now you put Sweat on, alongside of him or on the other side. That makes a pretty formidable defense for the Lions.
Yeah. Number 9, the Buffalo Bills are on the clock. I have them taking Ed Oliver. So the Bills were desperate for offensive players before free agency, but in the 2 unofficial days of free agency, they signed 2 receivers and 2 offensive linemen. So I don't think they're desperate for offensive players now. I think they can take the best player available, and I think that's Ed Oliver here. Oliver was once projected to be the number 1 pick in the 2019 NFL draft. He didn't play as well this past season, and he got into it with the coaches. So I think his stock has dropped a little bit, but I think at number 9, he's still arguably the best player on the board. And the Bills need to replace Kyle Williams. So I think I think Oliver is a great fit here. So Charlie, who do you have the Broncos taking at 10?
With the Broncos, I think this is kind of the dream and nightmare scenario wrapped into one. The dream because best option available on the defensive side and on offense. We've heard that John Elway loves Drew Lock, the quarterback from Missouri. So that's the one avenue. And then the other avenue defensively is Devin White, the linebacker from LSU. But considering they're both there, I think Elway, when push came to shove, would go with White because he did trade for Joe Flacco. You don't add a veteran like that with that salary just to put him on the bench or to only have him start, 6 or 8 games before you put the first-round rookie in. So I think with that being the case and Devin White available, they need help at inside linebacker. Thinking of Devin White between Von Miller and Bradley Chubb and Derek Wolfe inside, that would really be fun to watch. So I think that if the draft played out like this, the Broncos would take Devin White.
So it's 9. Buffalo's taking Ed Oliver. 10. The Broncos picking Devin White. What do you think, Kenny?
Yeah, I think what Charlie just said about Devin White is right on, man. I haven't seen him play a bunch, but everything you read about him, this guy is a great defensive playmaker, one of the best in the draft. And you think about him on that defense with some of those guys that are already there. That sounds like a great addition for the Broncos defense. The pick before him there, Oliver. Oliver is one of those guys. He's probably one of the biggest wild cards in this draft. Every year it seems like there's 1 or 2 guys that you see mocked with a pretty wide range. He was being talked about as the top pick of the draft or top 3, top 4 pick, not too long ago. And I've seen people say he should be a top 5 pick. I've seen guys say he's barely a first-round pick, and you've seen everything in between. So he's one of the guys that you legitimately feel like you don't know where he's going to go. If he can go to number 9, I think it's a great fit. He slides in there as the replacement for the recently retired Kyle Williams. I think that's a great fit for the Bills.
Yeah. Number 11, the Bengals are on the clock. And we heard last year that the Bengals wanted to draft 2 offensive linemen in their first 2 picks, and they couldn't do it because the guys they wanted in the second round weren't there, and they still need a tackle. And I think they take the best tackle on the board, and that's Jawan Taylor from Florida. He's the sort of big mauler that the Bengals love, and I think the Bengals would take Taylor here. So number 12, who do you have? Who do you have the Packers taking?
Yeah, I think that in the free agency here this is one of the times where we get a clue for the pick. And with the Packers signing 2 veteran edge rushers and Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith, you really can't see them using the 12th overall pick on another edge rusher, which was their biggest need coming into the offseason. So with that being the case, I think they're going to want to go for safe players, high character players. And I could see them looking to get some offensive line help. Obviously, this is a team that has to keep its quarterback healthy to have any shot of getting into the postseason and advancing in it. So I'm going to have them take Jonah Williams, the left tackle from Alabama. They'll probably slide him in at guard or perhaps right tackle. And he's just a really developed technician, great character, intelligent guy. So I think they'll just find a spot for him that helps their offensive line and put him in there in Green Bay.
Yeah, so that's Jawan Taylor to the Bengals, Jonah Williams to the Packers. What do you think, Kenny?
As I've mentioned, I feel like a broken record. I don't watch nearly as much college football as you guys do, but we watch Alabama because Alabama's on TV a lot. They're in every major game, and Jonah Williams is one of those guys. He's a mauler and he stands out to you, right? I mean, or at least to me when you're watching. So, he's one of the guys that you say, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. He's pro ready, as so many guys have there. By the way, I'm sorry to break from our coverage here, but I literally just saw a tweet from Mike Garofalo that says that as we're recording, Odell Beckham Jr. has been traded to the Cleveland Browns. There's no details yet, so I don't know if that'll impact this mock draft, or we just pretend like that didn't happen.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up when the Browns are on the clock at 17 because I have the NFL Network on TV here.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to.
When the Browns are on the clock, let's discuss it. But as for these two picks, what do you think?
And then Jawan Taylor, Jawan Taylor is the kind of guy that people were talking about him being a potential, top 5 pick not that long ago. And, people were talking about him, and I think Florida in general had a little bit of a down year, and I think that's depressed some of the stock. But I think you're right. This is a guy who's in many years, this guy would have been a top 10 or top 5 pick. I think with the glut of defensive linemen that's gone in this mock draft, kind of the run, I think it's kind of depressing some of the guys at other positions.
Yeah. All right. The Miami Dolphins at number 13. And speaking of receivers, with Beckham being traded, I think the Dolphins, I think they want to take a receiver here. They have really nothing at wideout. I know they just re-signed Devontae Parker, but he's been a giant turd for them. I don't see them doing anything. Amendola is gone. So we saw DK Metcalf go nuts during the combine, and he was kind of expected to. And people are saying now, I saw on Twitter when this happened that Metcalf is like a top 5 block. So many people are saying it. I don't think he's a top 5 block by any means, but I do think he's probably going to go in the top 15. And I think the Dolphins are a logical spot. We know that they're going to tank for Tua Tagovailoa, but Tua's going to need a receiver, and Metcalf has so much talent. So I think he makes sense here for the Dolphins at number 13. Charlie, who do you have the Falcons taking at 14?
Yeah, this is an interesting pick because they could go a number of directions, but with them franchising Grady Jarrett, and really needing help on the offensive line, consider some edge rush. But with the draft playing out like this, I'm going to have them take Cody Ford, the guard tackle from Oklahoma. He can play right tackle. He can move inside to guard. He's an excellent athlete, really big body. And he also, some think he could even play some left tackle too in the NFL. He's so versatile, but really he could turn into a Pro Bowl guard or right tackle pretty early in his NFL career, is what I've heard from a few teams. So I think Atlanta, for them to have any shot at getting back into the Super Bowl, they got to get that offense humming like it was a few years ago, and they need to improve the blocking. He'll help them run the ball. He'll help protect Matt Ryan and get more out of those receivers. So I'm going to have them take Cody Ford here.
Okay, Kenny, that's DK Metcalf to the Dolphins and Cody Ford to the Falcons. What do you think?
By the way, Walt, you called Devontae Parker a turd. Is that what you called him? I thought you said he's been a turd. Come on, man. Don't you love a guy who can catch 8 balls a year for 8 touchdowns? Come on, man. It's perfect. Anyway, I think Metcalf at 13 will be an absolute disaster pick. He has like perfect combine numbers, and he's the guy that to me, he reminds me of all the guys that look great. I mean, I think I've seen like a couple months ago, people were talking about this guy as like a 3rd round rated type player. I know he's got all the measurables, but the fact that he went crazy at the combine because he probably has spent the last 3 months of his life getting ready for it. And hey, mazel tov to him. He just made himself a couple $1 million. Hey, praise to him and his team. But everything you read about this guy, he's not a polished receiver. And I don't believe he's going to be good in the NFL. I think that's a bust pick at 13. And then Ford at 14. I've also read this, hey, this again, I haven't seen him play, but maybe once or twice all year, it feels like. But it feels like, hey, this is a guy that some teams don't even have rated in the 1st round. Some teams rated have him as a top 10 pick type caliber pick. Some teams think he's a 2nd or 3rd round grade. He's kind of a guy who's got a wide range on. When I'm drafting in the middle of the 1st round, I don't want a guy who's got that kind of X factor or that kind of a variable. I want a guy who I know is going to be solid. I'll take my risk in the 3rd or 4th round. I don't want that kind of guy. So and that makes me nervous at 14.
Yeah, Kenny, it doesn't sound like you're a fan of DK Mamula. I mean, Metcalf.
Exactly.
I'm not either. I don't know. I mean, he can't run routes. He wasn't productive at Ole Miss. It just reminds me of just like every year we have a guy stand out at the combine and then they don't do anything in the NFL. Usually not. So I don't like this pick, but we'll see. Number 15, the Redskins are on the clock. And Drew Lock is the final 1st round quarterback available. I think he's the pick here. They traded for Case Keenum and they still have Alex Smith, but they don't have a young quarterback. They need a young quarterback to start eventually. I think they start Case Keenum in 2019 and then Drew Lock, unless he's great in the preseason, I think he takes over in 2020 and beyond. So Drew Lock from Missouri, quarterback to the Redskins. Charlie, you're on the clock here with the Panthers at number 16.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, we've written from the combine that the Redskins really like Drew Lock. So we've heard that from them, and I think it makes a lot of sense too, in that you consider Drew Lock had a revolving door at offensive coordinator at Missouri. He never got consistent good coaching, and I think that makes a lot of sense with what you said about Keenum being the starter, and he's known as a great locker room guy and a guy that, obviously wouldn't cause problems with a young guy being taken behind him. So I think that just makes a ton of sense. Now at 16, Carolina, they could use edge rush help. We'll see, maybe that happens in free agency. They also offensive tackles another spot. Darrell Williams, their veteran right tackle's a free agent. 2017 2nd rounder Taylor Moton played pretty well, replacing him last year. But they also could stand to upgrade left tackle, as Matt Khalil has been a big disappointment, mistake signing by Dave Gettleman a few years ago. So I'm going to have them address the offensive tackle position and take Greg Little from Ole Miss, get them that left tackle to protect Cam Newton, and then they can end up with Moton or Williams on the right side, depending on how free agency shakes up. And if they do re-sign Williams, they could always move Moton inside to guard as well. So I'm having them take Greg Little.
Okay, so that's Drew Lock to the Redskins, Greg, Mr. Reliable Little to the Panthers. What do you think, Kenny?
Greg, Mr. Reliable Little. Why do I feel like there's some sarcasm there? I can't tell if that's sarcasm or if that's just your genuine affection for him. I'll say this first about Drew Lock. Drew Lock reminds me of a couple other quarterbacks that we've seen in previous drafts. Remember in 04, it was Manning and Rivers at the top of the draft, and then Roethlisberger slid to the middle of the first round or a little later in the first round. And then in 2008, Matt Ryan was drafted in the top 3. Flacco was much later. I think he was 17th or 18th overall. And as we look back into that draft, and then in the 2012 draft, I believe, was a draft where you had Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin III, and you had Trent Edwards. Well, later in that draft, you had a little guy named, you may have heard of Nick Franchise, Nick Foles. Last time I checked, Nick Foles was the only one of those guys that has a Super Bowl MVP on his resume. So I think
Russell Wilson was in that draft as well.
Oh, that's right. And he does not have a Super Bowl MVP, though. I think that's important to mention. Drew, anyone who listens to the podcast regularly know I have a pretty strong man crush on Russell Wilson, too. It's interesting. Drew Lock reminds me of one of those quarterbacks where he's not being talked about in the top 2, but will slide a little bit. But I think we'll look back years from now and that he likely could be the best quarterback or one of the best, or maybe the first quarterback to win a Super Bowl of this draft class. I think he's that kind of guy. And I'm surprised that he's not being talked about as a higher pick. Maybe a month from now, as the quarterbacks always seem to rise, maybe we'll see him in the top 10. Maybe he'll move up. But I think if he's going in the teens and Daniel Jones is going at number 6, I think as an Eagles fan, I'll be very happy to see the Giants blunder that. I think Drew Lock should be higher on this, and I think people are making a mistake underselling him to some extent. And then, you got a thought on that, Walt?
No, go ahead.
And then Little, again, he's similar to some of the guys we've already talked about, like a Rashawn Gary, where he's talked about as in this great athlete, but there's just been moments of great disappointment, very inconsistent. I don't like those kind of players. I like players that have been very productive for their entire college career, who've been reliable. I don't like taking risk in the first round. We've seen a lot of teams that take a lot of risk in the first round. That makes me nervous. Then we've seen teams like the Ravens always stand out to me as the type of team that they take players that are productive in college, that they don't take a lot of risk, and they seem to hit more than they don't. And so Little's the kind of player to me that if he ends up being a Hall of Fame type player, I don't think we'd be shocked. But if he's a bust and he's out of the league in 2 years, we also wouldn't be shocked. I don't like those kind of players in the first round. So I don't like that pick.
Yeah, major stock down, by the way, to Ryan Tannehill, because Kenny, you confused Tannehill with Trent Edwards. Unfortunately for Tannehill's career, it doesn't sound like it's going too well.
I said Trent Edwards. I meant to say Ryan Tannehill. I don't know what Trent Edwards. Whoa, that was what Trent Edwards came out like in the 2007 draft, didn't he? He was in the same draft with Kevin Cobb.
Yeah, that was a while ago. Yeah, so it just goes to show how bad Ryan Tannehill is. All right, so we're at the point I referenced earlier where the Browns would have been on the clock. We have the terms of this trade. The Browns acquired Odell Beckham from the Giants. I'm reading this off the TV in exchange for a first-round pick, a third-round pick, and Jabril Peppers. Kenny, what do you think about this trade?
First, third, and Peppers. Well, I think Peppers is an underrated player to some extent. A first rounder and a third rounder and Peppers for Odell Beckham seems like an overpay for the Browns. Since Dorsey took over, they've made a lot of good moves. We've now seen back-to-back trades that, in my mind, are overpay. The trade we saw from the Browns last week. But at the end of the day, Odell Beckham, even with all his crazy baggage and even with the contract, he's a dynamic player. Wow, this makes this offense – if Baker Mayfield takes a step forward, we're expecting him to take. This makes this offense a very, very potent offense in the AFC next year. I think this makes the Browns a much, much more serious Super Bowl contender, or at least AFC title contender than they were. As crazy as it may sound, that the Browns are in Super Bowl conversation, I think we'd be counting them out if we don't seriously consider them now.
Yeah, what do you think, Charlie?
Yeah, I actually think it's a great deal for the Browns. I think the third round pick, roughly 30% of those pan out in the NFL. Almost 70% of third round picks are failures. So to me, that's not much of a loss. Peppers was a pick of the prior regime, so I think that. That's something that the current guys probably felt, well, he might not be our the kind of safety we want to have. And then I think when you look at the first round here at 17, obviously there's no receiver that's even in the same ballpark as Odell Beckham right now.
Right.
DK Metcalf, I completely agree with both of you guys. The bust potential there is serious. And, so I think in terms of what would be available at 17, nothing is going to be comparable to what Odell Beckham can do for him. The contract, to me, isn't a real concern because you have Baker Mayfield on his rookie deal. You have Myles Garrett on his rookie deal. And you have those for years to come, so you don't have to worry about signing them in a year or two either. So I think it's a really great move for the Browns. I think it gives Baker Mayfield that number one. It helps Juice Landry. It helps Callaway. It helps Njoku. It helps Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So I think it's a really great move for the Browns, and I applaud them for really doing what it takes to get everything that Baker Mayfield could need to have success.
Yeah, I agree with you, Charlie. I think this is a great move for the Browns. And kind of you said it too. This makes Cleveland a Super Bowl contender. I completely agree with that. They have so much offensive firepower, and their defensive line is one of the best in the NFL now with all the moves they made in free agency. They only have a couple of holes, really. I mean, and they can fill one of the holes in the second round. And we still have some free agency left to go. So I like where the Browns are going, and you have to wonder why the Giants would trade Odell Beckham. I mean, he's such a great player. Maybe there's some stuff in the locker room that like we don't even know about. Like we know a bunch of stuff about Beckham already. Like maybe there's stuff behind the scenes that they just don't want to deal with anymore. That's the only thing I think of, because otherwise I think this is a poor trade for the Giants. Even getting a first round pick, like this draft class is not that strong. So 17 this year, not as good. If I were the Giants, I would have almost asked for the first rounder next year instead of this one, because I don't think this is going to be that good. But as for the sake of this mock draft, so 17, not the Browns anymore. The New York Giants are on the clock. And Charlie, you said that there aren't any receivers anywhere close to Odell Beckham here, and I completely agree. But what are the Giants going to do at receiver now? They don't really have anything except for Sterling Shepard, who's not that good. And I think A.J. Brown, you could say, is one of the better players available, and I guess that goes to show how weak this class is. But I think A.J. Brown it would make sense for the Giants here, just because they need a receiver, and he's a pretty decent player. I think he's more of a number two than a number one, but I think he'd be a fine pick here. So number 18, the Vikings. Who do you have them taking, Charlie?
Yeah, the Vikings here, this is a tough call for me because I thought that Christian Wilkins would be off the board, but he's still here, and they just lost Sheldon Richardson to the Browns. So that's a hole on the defensive line. But really, I think they have to go offensive line if there's a quality offensive line prospect available. The offensive line has been an issue for years. Obviously, they have a ton of money invested in Kirk Cousins. They need to get Dalvin Cook going to help Cousins and give him some good down and distance situations. So with that being the case, I'm going to have them take Andre Dillard, the left tackle from Washington State. They could slide Riley Reiff over to the right side. They cut Remmers. They took Brian O'Neill in the second round last year. They could move him inside to guard. So taking a tackle like Dillard could kind of set off a domino effect that might improve their line at a few spots. So with what their needs are, and this draft class having some depth on the defensive line, I think they could address that on day two, whereas the tackle talent won't be nearly as good on day two. So they take the tackle here, go for some D-line help on day two.
Okay, so that's A.J. Brown to the Giants and Andre Dillard to the Vikings. What do you think, Kenny?
There comes a moment in this kind of a podcast episode where I realize that I'm not nearly as valuable as the other people, so I'm just going to try to bring some comic relief to some extent. Listen, AJ Brown, Old Miss. I think I saw a handful of highlights this year, so let's not pretend like I know what I'm talking about with AJ Brown. He's a big, strong guy. I've read some comps to David Boston. For those of you, for people who remember that name, that's kind of a comp I've heard about for him. I don't know if that's a good comp or not, but yeah, again, what do I know? What I do hope happens here's what I really hope happens, by the way, is that my hope is that DK Metcalf actually falls to the Giants at 17 and that they draft him. He's a bust, that they would have traded away Beckham, their star receiver, for a receiver that busts. That's what I hope and pray actually happens. As of Dillard at 18, again, have I ever actually watched Washington State play football? No. Let's be honest. Come on.
Kenny, you're missing out. The Mike Leach offense is fun to watch.
Clearly, I've missed it out. Andre Dillard, I think the highest I've seen him mocked is like 16 to the Panthers, but I've also seen him mocked like outside of the first round, early part of the second round multiple times. So again, he's a big dude, but he's one of those guys. He's a variance type of guy. If you say he's good, I trust you.
Nice. Number 19, the Tennessee Titans. They need edge rushing help. They're going to lose Derek Morgan, or they might lose Derek Morgan and Brian Arakpo to free agency. I think they take an edge rusher, even though they drafted Harold Landry in the second round last year. So with this pick, they take Cleveland Farrell, the Clemson defensive end. I think this makes a lot of sense. I've had Farrell as high as 12 to the Packers, so I think this is pretty good value for him. Charlie, who do you have the Steelers taking at 20?
The Steelers, I have grabbing Devin Bush, the linebacker from Michigan. We've heard from some of our sources that that Pittsburgh really likes him. It makes a ton of sense. Obviously, Ryan Shazier still on his way back. We hope he comes back to play NFL football again. But really, the Steelers' defense hasn't been the same since that injury. They've missed that fast playmaking linebacker, inside linebacker presence, and Devin Bush could bring that. And hopefully, Shazier comes back and they can be a tandem together. And if he doesn't come back, well, then they've added that speed linebacker to the middle of their defense.
Yeah, so it's Cleveland Farrell to the Titans, Devin Bush to the Steelers. What do you think, Kenny?
This is amazing. I've actually seen both of these players play. We went back-to-back picks where I had no clue. I'd never seen them play, and now I've seen both of these guys play. By the way, I've heard someone call him Farrell. I'm pretty sure that's a mispronunciation. Farrell from Clemson, man, this guy reminds me. Remember Jason Taylor? He played for the Dolphins for many years. He reminds me. He's kind of got that slender, but he's quick first move, but he's strong upper body. He's a great pick. If you can get him at 19, man, he's a great pick. I think he should be going higher in the draft. And then Bush at 20, I think that's a great pick as well for the Steelers. As you mentioned, Charlie, Ryan Shazier, we all hope he makes it back. The tragic situation there. We hope he makes it back for his sake. But if he doesn't, the Steelers need to add to the middle of that defense. And I think Bush, who played at Michigan, my Big Ten bias showing again. I think he's not like an all-around. I don't think he's like a phenomenal player. I don't think he's like a great playmaker, but he's an all-around good player who's going to fit their system well. So I like Devin Bush a lot. I think those are both really good underrated picks.
All right, the Seahawks are on the clock at 21. I have TJ Hawkinson here in my mock draft, but Charlie, you said something a few picks ago where you thought Christian Wilkins could replace Sheldon Richardson for the Vikings. Well, how about Christian Wilkins replacing Sheldon Richardson for the Seahawks? Because they lost Richardson recently, and they need a presence in the interior, and Wilkins is the best player available. So I like Wilkins here at 21. Charlie, who do you have the Ravens taking at 22?
Yeah, this is a tough call. I think that Wilkins pick to the Seahawks is great, makes a lot of sense. With the Ravens here, I considered pulling Maurice Jones-Drew when he was brand new to NFL Network, and when he was doing a mock and he had the Chargers take Ezekiel Elliott at number 3 overall. And then someone said to him, but they took Melvin Gordon in the first round last year. And he had a shocked look on his face. So I thought about that for a second with Hawkinson, because in some ways Hawkinson is maybe the best, safest player available, but obviously the Ravens aren't going to do that. They drafted 2 good tight ends last year. So with that being the case, I think the Ravens would love it if there was a receiver worthy of this pick. Is there? Not really, but I think, with that being the case, they do it anyway, because the other positions of need aren't a lot of great options there either. We're kind of at the point of the draft where we're running out of first-round talent. A lot of these guys that go in the 20s are going to be graded as second rounders for a lot of the teams around the league. And of course, the team that takes the guy isn't going to say, oh yeah, we graded him 33, but we had to take him at 24. You aren't going to hear that. But that's the case for a lot of these guys, because there just aren't 32 graded first round players in this draft. So with the Ravens needing to give Lamar Jackson help, I'm going to have them take Marquise Brown, the speedster wide receiver from Oklahoma. They got to get some more passing weapons for Jackson in the immediate future and the long-term future. Brown gives them that home run hitter. And Jackson at Louisville, the accuracy issues he needs to improve, but he did show some deep ball potential, and you saw him air out some beautiful touchdown passes. So I could see Brown being a nice little connection there. So I'll have them take Marquise Brown out of Oklahoma.
Okay, so it's Christian Wilkins to the Seahawks, Marquise Brown to the Ravens. What do you think, Kenny?
I think what Charlie just said about the Ravens, it makes a lot of sense. And you're right. There's a lot of players that in this time of the draft seem to not really be first round picks in terms of talent. But I think there's a few guys on the board that maybe some teams might covet, right? It only takes 1 or 2 teams to jump up. We saw that with the Saints last year, seemingly overvaluing a player that's actually seemingly worked out for them. But we've seen that. I would love for them to kind of to give Jackson a speedy down the field player like a Brown. But the reality is they literally just had that. John Brown, they just released in free agency or lost in free agency to the Bills. And they didn't really utilize him as well. And so it's one of those picks that you think should make sense, but you wonder if that'll end up not making sense because they for some reason, don't utilize him well. Or maybe Jackson never figures out how to throw the ball down the field accurately, in an NFL system. So I hope that's not the case because I like Jackson and I'm rooting for him. At 21, Wilkins is that's a great selection, right? Well, you said he's the best player left on the board. He might have been the best player on the board for several picks before that. I've seen him mocked as early as like 12 to the Packers. He's frequently being mocked to the Falcons at 14. So if the Seahawks can get him at 21 to bolster, a position of need and kind of start to rebuild that defense, that's a really, really great addition, coming off of that great Clemson team. I expect the players drafted from Clemson to be NFL ready type players. And Wilkins obviously is, along with Farrell at the top of that list.
Yeah, I had Wilkins as high as 9 at one point. I think if he slips to 21, Seattle is going to get a huge steal. 23, Charlie, you just mentioned this guy, TJ Hawkinson, Iowa tight end. Seems like the Texans have needed a tight end since Owen Daniels. Like they haven't had that intermediate presence on the field. And we saw last year when Will Fuller went down, the Texans didn't really have that many options outside of DeAndre Hopkins. So I think getting another weapon for their offense, Hawkinson, I feel like it's a good pick because he's one of the best players available and he fills a need. So I like Hawkinson here. 24. Who do you have? Who do you have on the clock for the Raiders?
Well, the Raiders here, we had them take Dwayne Haskins at 4. So obviously the defense is still needing help. That's really the edge rush. The corner, safety, linebacker. They need help all over the place. So with this being the case, I'm going to have them take Brian Burns, the pass rush edge rusher from Florida State. give them a speed rusher to go across from Arden Key. The inside guys, Hurst and PJ Hall, played pretty well as rookies. So I could see them being more inclined to go with an edge rusher like Burns over a defensive tackle like Tremont Jones from Ohio State or Dexter Lawrence from Clemson.
Okay, that's Hawkinson to the Texans and Brian Burns to the Raiders. What do you think, Kenny?
Do we have to talk about Iowa tight ends? Is that exciting for us? Yeah, I mean, there are obviously 2 Iowa tight ends that are being projected, high in this draft. I did happen to have seen Hawkinson play a few times, mostly because he almost helped Iowa beat Penn State not too long ago. So that would have been disastrous for those of us who thought Penn State had a legitimate national championship chance. Obviously, we were mistaken. No, I mean, you mentioned Owen Daniels, by the way. Whoa, what a reference, throwback there. I think I had him on like multiple fantasy teams a couple years back. But yeah, I think you're right. He's the best player, one of the best players available. He fills position in need, and I think he adds he adds an element to the Texans offense that they don't currently have. So I think that potentially is a good pick. Burns at 24, I think, is a great pick. I actually would be surprised if he actually makes it this far, because he's the kind of player, kind of like, he's got some kind of like that freak in him, that that Javon Curse kind of athlete in him. He has moments where he looks like that, even though he doesn't consistently play that way. And he's got the pedigree, Florida State. He's the kind of guy that some team late in the first round is going to fall in love with, and they're going to trade up to get into the teams and get him. He's the kind of guy that I think most teams probably think he's really a late first round or early second round talent, but some team is going to love him and trade up to 15 or 16 or something like that to get him. So I'd be surprised if he lasts this long, but if he does, I think it's a good pick.
All right, number 25, Kenny's Philadelphia Eagles are on the clock.
Come on.
I have been taking running back Josh Jacobs from Alabama. So last year, the Eagles wanted to take Sony Michel at the end of the first round. The Patriots plucked them off the board 1 pick earlier, and that's why the Eagles traded down from 32, just because their guy was off the board. I don't know if they like Jacobs yet. Maybe we'll find that out, but he's the best running back in this class, and the Eagles need a running back, so I think he makes sense here for Philadelphia. So, Charlie, who do you have the Colts taking at 26?
Yeah, I love that pick. Colts at 26. I have to say, I think Morocco Brown and their GM, Chris Ballard, Morocco Brown's their college director of scouting. I think those guys and their pro scouts have just done an amazing job of turning maybe the least talented, most finesse team in the NFL to one of the most physical teams in the NFL. Seemingly overnight in a way. And so I think they're going to keep that kind of identity going. And I think that's really what they're looking for. Physical football players, guys that will beat you up and get nasty. And I think with that kind of being the kind of player they want, I'm going to have them take Dexter Lawrence, the massive nose tackle from Clemson, give them that big body on the inside, help them defend Leonard Fournette and Derrick Henry in the division, give them a guy to eat up blockers and help free up Danico Autry to use that speed rush on the inside, along with freeing up of their other ends like Margus Hunt, Jabal Sheard. So I'm going to have them take Dexter Lawrence from Clemson.
Okay, that's Josh Jacobs to the Eagles, Dexter Lawrence to the Colts. Kenny, what do you think? And I'm very curious about your Eagles opinion here.
All right, well, I'll go Colts first. Lawrence, I like him. Again, I've already mentioned Clemson players. I think those guys are pro ready. They're going to step in, meets a need there, and I think can contribute right away. I like that pick. I think it's good value. There's a few other players that I think they can go. Maybe the Colts go with a receiver, one of the other receivers that are on the board, like a Butler, from Iowa State, that's highly touted by some guys. But as far as the Eagles taking a running back there, I don't know if I like it or not. The Bama running backs have kind of been very inconsistent. Mark Ingram he had a few good years. He started off slow in his career and has come on the last few years. And then you've had some other Bama running backs that have not been so great. Guys like a Derrick Henry and a Trent Richardson that have been very, very up and down, hit or miss. So you always wonder, is a guy like Josh Jacobs. Is he being very productive because he's great, or is he being productive because of the offensive line and the system and the coaching that goes on there at Alabama and the other players around him? So, it's really, really hard to tell for me. I've seen Jacobs play a lot. He looks great, but I'm seriously suspect as to whether or not he's great because he's great in his own right, and whether or not that'll translate to the NFL. So that makes me a little bit nervous. In fact, I'd be shocked if they take a running back here. I think the Eagles will probably take either a defensive lineman or a cornerback. I think they really want to add some depth at defensive end and kind of begin to bolster as they look ahead to the future, or maybe cornerback if they don't re-sign Ronald Darby. So I hope you're right. I hope they do take a running back. I hope he ends up being great. I hope it's amazing. I hope he runs over every player ever, and I hope he's better than Jim Brown if they take him.
Well, don't criticize Trent Richardson too much because he's tearing up the allegiance of American football right now. So that's it's quite the feat. All right, so the Raiders at 27. I get to pick with the Raiders now, and I'm sticking with the Charlie's recent theme of going defense here. I think they take the first cornerback off the board. It's hard to believe, first corner off the board at number 27. It's DeAndre Baker from Georgia. This cornerback class is not good, but if there's one guy from the position who's going to go in the first round, I think it's Baker, and he's going to fill a need for the Raiders. So, Charlie, who do you have the Chargers taking at 28?
Yeah, this is not an easy team to project because they have a pretty balanced roster. Tom Telesco has done a pretty nice job there, so they don't really have a need that just screams at you. So, but I do think they could use more interior pass rush. They took Justin Jones last year. And I think that, when you consider the age factor that they've had on the inside of the defensive line, they'll need to continue to get younger there. So I have them taking Draymond Jones, the interior speed rusher from Ohio State. And I think that really amps up that pass rush even more to have a guy like that between Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram.
Okay, so that's DeAndre Baker to the Raiders and Draymond Jones to the Chargers. What do you think about those two picks, Kenny?
I think Charlie's 100% right that the Chargers have, really the most complete team in the NFL, in my opinion. They don't have the best team, but they have the most complete team. They've got a lot of talent and a lot of depth at pretty much every unit with no real gaping holes. And you expect this team to be a playoff contender again. I think many of us do. And so, maybe even a Super Bowl contender. So you're right. I think they're hard to mock, but I think Jones, you're right. If you add him to what they've already got on the defensive side, that's particularly with Bosa, obviously, that seems to be a pretty formidable addition. So that's exciting if you're a Chargers fan, as Walter calls them, the San Angeles Chargers. As far as Baker goes, I think cornerback is probably a good fit there. And you're right, man. Walt, you said it. The fact that the first corner in this mock draft is 27 is shocking. Remember the days when we'd see multiple corners and defensive backs going in the top 15. I think that speaks partially to maybe the lack of talent at the cornerback position in this year's draft class, but also just speaks to maybe some of the overemphasis that's going on at the defensive line position. It's kind of pushing down some of the other positions to some extent. We've seen that. And I've seen lots of other cornerbacks mocked ahead of Baker. I've seen Baker mocked as the fourth or fifth cornerback off the board. So I don't know which cornerbacks will go first off the board. But I think you're right. What we'll probably see this year is cornerback going later than we usually expect.
Yeah, I think so. Number 29, the Kansas City Chiefs. They just lost their center, Mitch Morse. So I think they're going to try to draft a replacement. And we all know that Andy Reid loves to bolster the trenches. So I'm going to have the Chiefs taking center Garrett Bradbury here at number 29. Maybe a little bit higher than some might think. But I think Bradbury, who had an excellent combine, could sneak into the first round. Also considered Chris Lindstrom as well. I think the Chiefs need to bolster their offensive line because Patrick Mahomes is under heavy pressure in the AFC Championship. So they really need that to change. So, Charlie, who do you have the Packers taking at 30?
Yeah, this was a pick that up until free agency, I could see them taking a safety here, like Jonathan Abram or Taylor Rapp. But with them signing Adrian Amos from the Bears, they have Josh Jones coming back. So really, they should be pretty good there at safety. They took a bunch of cornerbacks last year. They signed edge rushers. So they're in position here where they could look to do something to help Aaron Rodgers even more, maybe find a replacement for Randall Cobb with a home run hitter, a speed receiver, and a guy that can change the game. So with this being the case of Amos coming in, I'm going to switch from safety and have them take Paris Campbell, the wide receiver from Ohio State. Electric playmaker with the ball in his hands. Needs some development with the hands in terms of just catching passes. The Ohio State receivers for years now, they've had a lot of talented guys come through there that Urban Meyer recruited there, but they didn't really showcase them. They've been such a running team. You saw that with Michael Thomas coming out. He was tremendous. I remember talking with a scout saying, for my money, the best two receivers in that draft were Will Fuller and Michael Thomas. It all depended whether you needed a speed guy or a big guy. And I think Paris Campbell has done a disservice as well in terms of how he was kind of used at Ohio State and not really shown his abilities. So, but I think some teams are going to see that combine speed and really that it translates to the field and what he can do. And I think he's the replacement for Randall Cobb here.
Okay, so that's Garrett Bradbury to the Chiefs and Paris Campbell to the Packers. What do you think, Kenny?
I think you're right. Andy Reid loves to bolster the trenches. He did it for years in Philadelphia. He's got a similar track record now in Kansas City, and so I think that makes a lot of sense. The Paris Campbell pick, by the way, I think has a potential to be a very unique pick. I've read quite a bit. I've seen him play for Ohio State. I think Charlie's 100% right. This team has a way to utilize players to help Ohio State be effective, but it doesn't necessarily, showcase what those players can do or develop them as much for the NFL as what we see other schools doing. And I read one website say that basically Campbell's a bigger, stronger version of Curtis Samuel, who came out of Ohio State a few years ago. Kind of can be you can line up all over the field. You can even put him in the backfield if you need to. You can put him in the slot. You can put him outside, X, Y. Can run the whole route tree. He's got hands. Kind of a really unique Percy Harvin type of player. So a bigger, stronger version of Curtis Samuel. I think that's very intriguing. And you put him with, arguably the best quarterback, in the NFL, in what we think will be a better offense with a better offensive system. At least I think it will be, because they just got rid of the most overrated coach maybe in the last 20 years in the NFL. I think Campbell could be a really, really unique X factor type of player in this draft.
Yeah, well, I have the urge to go back and hear Kenny, your rant about Mike McCarthy again after hearing that. The last two picks in the first round, number 31, the Rams. They just lost Roger Saffold to the Titans in free agency. I think they need a replacement here, and I just mentioned Chris Lindstrom a couple picks ago, the guard from Boston College. I think he's a good pick here for the Rams. They need to replace Saffold. They have to protect Jared Goff, and who knows what's going to happen with Todd Gurley? He might not be as effective, so they might need better blocking next year for him. So Lindstrom's the pick here for me. Number 32, the Patriots are the last pick. Who do you have them taking, Charlie?
Well, with the draft playing out like this, I think the Patriots are getting a really nice value at 32 and getting the top safety in the draft. That's a rarity to really get any top position player late in the first round, much less a position like safety that has an impact on the run and pass game. So I'm going to have them take Jonathan Abram. The Patriots have some older safeties. They could use some youth there. He really he plays the game the right way. He's a physical force. He's a dynamic tackler, can do things in coverage, has versatility as to how you can use him in the pass game. Mississippi State probably had him play a little more man coverage than he should, but I think the Patriots are just going to like the fact that he's done so many different things. And that's just, to me, he seems like a Patriots kind of player. So given the players available, I think he would be the pick for New England.
Okay, so that's Chris Lindstrom to the Rams and Jonathan Abram to the Patriots, the first safety off the board. Kenny, what do you think about these final two picks?
I agree 100% with Charlie's pick that they're getting a great pick with safety. I guess I didn't think Abram was the best safety in this draft. So when you said they were going to get a nice pick, the best safety in the draft, I thought you were going to say Thornhill from Virginia, who again I've seen play all of once, but I've seen him being ranked as the best safety by many people. So I guess I was a little bit surprised to hear you say he being there. There's also some other cornerbacks that I thought might get drafted in the first round that haven't been drafted. Amani from Penn State, Greedy Williams from LSU, Murphy. There's some other guys that are in the secondary, but I do think that's the right pick for the Patriots. Them getting a value pick in the secondary makes a lot of sense. And I think Lindstrom's a great pick. Again, big guy from Boston College, again, who I've seen him play, all of twice, I think, all year long. But again, you don't have to watch, some of these guys, you don't have to watch play a lot to see them be great. They jump off the screen as guys that can maul. I think I saw him play one game where he's literally blocking two guys at the line of scrimmage, and then he gets down in the screen game and he's 10 yards down the field blocking a linebacker. He's that kind of player, very athletic. So I think that adds a lot to a team who is obviously wanting to keep their own window open for a Super Bowl. Whether or not they're a legitimate Super Bowl contender again, I think I've got my doubts, but no doubt they're going to want to keep their Super Bowl chances open. And you can't do that if you don't have solid depth and talent on the offensive line. So that seems like a really good selection there.
Yeah, Kenny, you mentioned that the corner is not going off the board, and I think there's a legitimate chance that we may not see a cornerback at all go in the first round. That's how bad this corner class is. I think ultimately we will see one or two, just because the position is so important. But this corner class is bad, and I think we'll see a bunch of corners go in round two. The guys you mentioned, plus the Temple's own Rock Yesson, I think he will go there as well. Jamal Dean from Auburn is too. I think he's in the second round mix, and maybe Julian Love from Notre Dame. But yeah, these guys are just not that good. Charlie, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, definitely. They both, I know teams that have graded Greedy Williams and Byron Murphy in the second round. I think Greedy helped himself with that 40 time at the combine, running that fast. That they did say the technique in the field drills was a little disappointing, especially for, I guess, the LSU corner when you think about the guys they've had come through there. But I think, and Byron Murphy, similarly, could go in the first round, could slip to the second round. And DeAndre Baker, like you said, he could slip too because there are concerns about his speed being just kind of pedestrian, and also some makeup off the field issues with him that could push him down. So yeah, this corner class really just is very underwhelming. It's one of the weak spots of the draft. So I definitely think we could see some of these corners slide. And then also looking at some other guys we've had slide here, I think Ja'Kai Polite, that's going to be an interesting pick in this draft. We didn't find him in the first round before the combine. If you didn't have him in the top 15, you would have been like, what something's wrong there. But the combine was disastrous for him, major off the field issues. And that got highlighted in the interviews, and then the workout didn't happen after a poor 40. So this kind of point in the draft is going to be wild card territory. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some real shocking picks late in the first round, just because there aren't 32 first rounders. So some teams are just going to grab guys that they like and they feel are safer than maybe some bigger names that we all think will go in the first.
Yeah, you mentioned Polite. I think a similar prospect, Jeffrey Simmons. He's good, very talented,
Yeah.
but with off the field problems, I almost mocked him to both the Chiefs and the Rams here. So I think he might go late in the first round, maybe to the Patriots as well. I think we've seen the Patriots take chances on guys like this before.
Yep.
Yeah. So that is it for our mock draft extravaganza, our second version of our mock drafts in the books. So I think the plan is to have two more, one after free agency at the beginning of April, and then one the week before the real NFL draft, maybe like even the week of. So we'll see what the scheduling looks like. So yeah, that's it. Charlie, thank you as always for coming on for these mock drafts. It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you guys.
It's a pleasure to have you on. And like I said before, your reporting during the combine was outstanding. I really enjoyed reading every report you send over, and I know the readers did as well, based on the feedback I received.
Thank you guys so much. You guys are awesome. It's great doing this. So we'll grind through free agency here, and everyone knows that no one covers free agency as good as Walt. The grades, the rankings, you don't find that anywhere else. Great perspective. So everyone just keep checking back on the site to see Walt's grades, and he does it with some entertainment flair, and respectfully retired the Millen grade, but we have a new great one that he's debuted. So I'll let everyone check that out. But thank you, Walt. Thank you, Kenny. You're killing it as always, buddy, and happy to hear you're back in the good health range.
Oh yeah. Thank you, Charlie. And yeah, with that in mind, I am going to go grade the Odell Beckham trade. So that'll be fun. Kenny, what do you have going on at fantasyjabber.com?
I've actually just started my annual rewatching of the entire NFL season. So I may have some notes. Anyone who wants to follow me on Twitter, and hopefully by the end of April or sometime in May, I will have my should have been interceptions list. It'll be the fourth year running where I produced the list of all the passes that quarterbacks threw that should have been intercepted that have not been. So literally just starting that this week.
I'm looking forward to that. That's one of the few things, or one of the many things actually, I look forward to in the summer. I want to see who's the top of that list for sure. So yeah, definitely let us know when that's complete. So yeah, that's it. I will talk to you guys next week. Kenny, I'm looking forward to hearing your opinions on all these free agency moves, but that'll be for next time. So I'll talk to you guys later.
You man.
Take care.
All right, bye guys.